Dames en heren, hartelijk welkom bij deze afscheidsbijeenkomst ter gelegenheid van het emeritaat van N. Baker, hoogleraar Psycholinguïstiek en Taalpathologie en hoogleraar Nederlandse gebarentaal aan de Universiteit van Amsterdam. Mijn naam is Kees Hengeveld, ik ben hoogleraar Algemene Taalwetenschap en ik ben een directe collega van N. Het programma vanmiddag bestaat uit enkele onderdelen. Eerst zal N een college voor ons verzorgen, haar afscheidscollege met als titel A Few of My Favorite Things. Daarna zal N eerst worden toegesproken door professor Paul Boersma, voorzitter van de capaciteitsgroep taalwetenschap van deze universiteit, ook een directe collega van N. En daarna door professor Frank van Vree, decaan van de faculteit. En daarna bent u allen van harte welkom bij de receptie in ditzelfde gebouw zal plaatsvinden. Ik geef nu eerst graag het woord aan N. Baker zelf.
Dear Dean, colleagues, friends and family, ladies and gentlemen, as you will have noticed, this lecture is going to be interpreted into Sign Language of the Netherlands, NGT. And so that you understand how this works, for those of you who are not familiar with it, people who are following the interpreter need time to look at the slides and then look at the interpreter. So the pace of the whole proceedings will be quite peaceful. Also, there will be many names on the slides, and I will not read those out since these, it would take the interpreters too long to fingerspell the names. Okay, so my favorite things. Basically, you're going to hear what I've chosen and why. And in the course of that discovery, nice for me to do. Many people have played a part. Some of you will see your names. Some of you will recognize that you are involved in what I am talking about. So, you know, it's really basically a big thank you to everyone who's here. Okay, languages. Already at school, I was learning languages and thinking, okay, why does English do this way? Why does English say dominate, following Romance languages, but it's actually a Germanic language? I didn't know anything about linguistics, but these were kind of questions that were intriguing me. And after school, I went to do an interpreter training in London, and the question kept coming back, of course. Why does one language do it one way and one language another? After the interpreter training, I went to Kiel University, and this was really my first encounter with linguistics. Not because there was a linguistics course. In fact, at that time, in the 60s, it was very hard to find a university that did linguistics, and I'm not sure that I really even knew there was such a subject at that point in time. But at Kiel University, I read a book by Simeon Potter, a book dating from 1951, and that triggered my interest. But at Kiel University was also special because at that time, every student had to follow one humanity, one social science, and one natural science. And by doing that, I also came into contact with the fact that subjects are very much related and interdisciplinary work. And it also led me to consider the question how first language acquisition and second language acquisition are related to one another. So when I went to York University to do my PhD, this was actually the topic of my PhD thesis, comparing the two language acquisition processes. At York University, we had some really stimulating staff, and of course, you know, it was my first real intensive contact with linguistics. It was a real eye-opener. And my fellow students were also an eye-opener, in the sense that I was talking to students there, BA level, MA level, also people doing a PhD. And these are some of the students that I was interacting with. Those of you in the field of linguistics will realize that all three of these people later became linguistics professors. And I thought they were just normal. They were a challenge. Okay, having completed my PhD, I moved to the University of Tübingen in Germany. This was a very different situation, of course, working in a German university. One of the biggest changes was that in my first 5 years of being there, I had 4 children. And some people only still have an image of me with a perpetual bump. I hope I've lost it a bit. At Tübingen University, I was intrigued, had already become intrigued actually from York by teaching on what the influence was of being able to see or not being able to see on the acquisition of sounds. And here you see my son Nick at the tender age of 7 months participating in this experiment. I don't think it's harmed him. This pilot experiment in which infants were copying mouth movements produced by an adult, and they did very consistently, led to a project in which we had looked at blind children's phonology. And here you see my postdoc at that time, who, by the way, is now a professor of psychology in Erlangen. Great people I've had around me. This project, though, not only taught me a lot about an atypical population, but it also confronted me with the reality of the families involved. Being told in the corridor that your child was blind, no offer of counseling or help. When we went in as project researchers, we were the source of information for the parents. And the societal impact of research was really brought home to me, particularly in my field. At the same time as working on blind children, I continued my work on cross-linguistic aspects of acquisition, but this time English and German, and looking at gender. I took inspiration from my own bilingual children. Here we see Chris, who, when he was corrected about saying der Kran, he used he had said der Kran, and he had answered, it's not das Kran, it's not a boy. He'd made the semantic link from the German system, and this triggered me, encouraged me to consider how gender is learned in 2 languages, and also how grammatical gender impacts on other cognitive tasks. In order to look at this, I developed a task in which German children and English children had to invent a little story. And here, 2 of the characters which were in the story, a clock and a mouse, and both of these have feminine grammatical gender in German. And of course, there were more of these, but taking these 2 examples, what do German children do then? Do they make these characters female? Do they follow the grammatical gender? And do English children do the same, where of course there is not the grammatical gender? Well, there is a difference, and the grammatical gender does have an impact on this kind of cognitive task. So this interest in language and cognition, okay, limited at this time, was there. When I then moved from Tübingen with all the children to the University of York St. John, I continued actually my work there with blind children. Here I was interested in to what extent does the vision affect the acquisition of spatial prepositions, such as in front of or behind. In order to learn these items adequately, you need to know about the fronts and backs of objects. You need not only to know that that is involved in the linguistic system, but you need also to know how do you identify them. Blind children don't have access to the information to make that possible. Well, at least it's much more difficult. Here you see my daughter Alex helping with the pilot study of this setup. Well, then came the great year, as Jan de Jong mentioned this morning in the symposium, 1988. The University of Amsterdam. 25 years in the Bunge House. What a privilege to work in such a beautiful building. The staff were fantastic. They helped find our house. They helped unpack boxes. They created the most welcoming atmosphere, one of them also being that they continually spoke Dutch to me at my request. This has been characteristic of our department for all those years, the tremendously friendly and supportive working atmosphere. I also got to know some unusual characters. A colleague who wrote crime fiction, a rabid Scot who liked rap music, a very nice colleague, but with an Amsterdam accent such that I couldn't understand him for the first 6 months. And famously, a colleague who could fall asleep in lectures and still ask brilliant questions at the end. Those of you who know the staff will identify these people with no problem. One of the first things that happened in terms of research was that I started a project on how children acquire a sign language. And because I had taken on the responsibility for sign linguistics from my predecessor, Bente Voort. So this new project started, but of course, I had to learn NGT. And I wish to thank my very patient teacher, over the years, who really helped me in learning that language. At the same time, to study acquisition, it is crucial to also have data on the grammar and other aspects, linguistic aspects of the language you are studying. And this was a very important aspect which Roland Faul talked about this morning. And I was amazed too, Roland, how much we have achieved in that area in this time. To go back to the acquisition project, though, there were 2 key workers on this project, and I'm very pleased to announce that Beppie van der Boogaarde will be taking up the personal chair of sign linguistics as of the end of this month. Okay, sign languages then. How do children acquire a sign language? But I was also carrying on with my other interests. How is Dutch acquired in comparison to other languages? Here, an important stimulus has been working in the research context of the Amsterdam Center for Language and Communication, in particular the research group Grammar and Cognition. What are the characteristics of primary or specific language impairment, and how can we explain these? What are characteristics or aspects like bilingualism, ADHD, psychiatric disorder, or physical impairment mean for language acquisition? And what impact do characteristics of the learner, a disorder, what areas of cognition are related to language? This has been also gone through my research. And Jan, this was a point of my interest right from the very beginning. Just So 3 recurring themes throughout my research, you can see them here. The variation you find in the language system, the interaction of language and cognition, and the impacts of the characteristics of the learner. And just recently, not only then the aspects of language acquisition, but also looking at older users of a language, so in particular now dementia in a sign language. And just over lunch, Bensie Wall and I have discussed a future project. When you do research, as was actually mentioned this morning, the aspect of sharing knowledge has always been really important to me. I've never been someone for the ivory tower, and the people I've met have been a great inspiration. The first such project that I was really involved in was a project from the European Science Foundation. This project was really crucial because at that point, European languages had not been studied so much in depth in terms of language acquisition. And when, in the context of this project, we traveled around to many different European countries, we were actually amazed to see how many people were working on small studies in isolation and were not aware of each other. And just a note for the junior researchers, how come was I working with these illustrious people? Well, I opened my mouth. I said what I thought. So just do it, okay? From this time on, too, I had very good contacts with the Max Planck Institute in Nijmegen. And just to remember 2 colleagues from that institute who are very dear to me. Another way, or another aspect of this information exchange is being involved in international associations. And the International Association for the Study of Child Language has something I've been involved in ever since the beginning of my career. I attended the first large international conference in Europe in 1974 and realized the potential of this organization. I've been involved in it ever since. And as many of you know, we will be organizing this conference next year here in Amsterdam. Here, my colleagues from Utrecht and Amsterdam and Antwerp. This kind of organization is a worldwide international organization, and the conferences are large. Another very important aspect is networking in a smaller, intensive context. And the European Child Language Disorders Group is something which I was involved again from the beginning in 1986. And here, the people who have helped set this up and continued organizing it, this group of a small number of researchers, more than 20 countries are involved, more than 23 languages, but here focusing on what can we learn about language disorders from how they appear in different languages in Europe. Another professional society I've been involved in is the Sign Language Linguistics Society, started in 1998, and which is still going strong. Here a selection of the committee members that, just a selection, who've been working so hard for it, and it is really flourishing. Some networks are temporary. They form an intensive way of bringing researchers together. And I want to mention one here, which is the COST network on language impairment and multilingualism. A network that ran for just under 5 years. Again, more than 30 countries have been involved, and Amsterdam had an important role in the initiating of this network. So one of my favorite things then networking, information exchange. When you are involved in projects, though, an important aspect too is the fact that you collect huge amounts of data, you do your little bit with it, but the rest must not get lost. I can't emphasize enough the importance of data archiving. And I'm haunted by the story of the films of deaf children made by my predecessor, Bente Voort, that got lost in the cellar. Clarin is the Dutch organization that has stimulated this aspect of our work as academics. And just to name 3 projects in which I've directly been involved, one on sign language acquisition archiving, on language impairment data archiving, and going even further, a current project on all aspects of language impairment and how to archive that data. When I came to Amsterdam, I was really very pleased to see how much was going on in terms of a relationship between the university and the practical field. Before the terms societal relevance or valorization were the buzzwords, the group in Amsterdam had a tradition of instrument development for children with language disorders. Here we see an important program for children with physical difficulties. Another program or another analysis method for the diagnosis of children with language disorder. And currently emerging from the COST project, the Litmus group, which will continue to develop tests for multilingual children, and we are still working on tests in the context of this network for Dutch. Working together with Kentalis, the development of an observation list for young children learning NGT. And a project which we've just started on, myself and together with the Radboud University, working on a sentence repetition task for NGT. Doing this kind of work of program development and test development, the contact with practical institutions is invaluable. And I'd had great fun putting this slide together, but actually had to stop in the end because of the numerous contacts that we have had with the practical institutions. Quite phenomenal, I think. And this is not to say that everything is always optimal. It can be better, because I think both sides have to work hard to make sure there is a good exchange of information. But what is important in this contact is the fact that we can find practical placements for our students. We can organize workshops for practitioners to pass on the information from research. We can develop tests and also not just development in the ivory tower, but run pilots, really work with data. And we can do effectivity studies. Effectivity studies are essential because it is, in order to form educational policy and treatment policy for children with problems, you need evidence-based practice. And without an effectivity study, you cannot do or form educational policy just on gut feeling. One other aspect of my work which was very important to me and still is the recognition of NGT. I was involved in the committee, the government committee, which brought out this report. We made 64 recommendations for the use of NGT in society, and we carried on the work with a national committee to try to ensure that these recommendations were implemented and maintained. It's been an uphill battle. It's something which could actually be all the work that you do every day. Why? Because you have to lobby politicians. Politicians come and go, and the next politician knows nothing. Nada. Okay, we're still fighting for official recognition, and we need to continue. Another aspect of your work, these have really been all the aspects of research, but one very important aspect of work here as an academic is teaching. And I have always taken great pleasure in developing teaching materials. It's a central task, and it's certainly not a chore. You're never done. We have written an introductory textbook to linguistics in English, and again, been able to draw on my children for nice examples to make the text a little bit lively. The Dutch version also quickly followed. In terms of sign linguistics, we also have brought out a textbook, and the English version is to appear soon. Another aspect of developing teaching materials is the fact that more and more students are being asked to work with self-teaching and e-learning. And again, here for NGT, working with my deaf colleagues, their material is being developed. And we still have a way to go with developing this kind of material for linguistics. That doesn't mean it replaces the person-to-person contact, but that time is precious. Okay. Working with students, just fantastic. Okay. Stimulating intellectual curiosity in students and seeing this work. Teaching logical thinking and critical attitudes. Yeah. Helping to develop good presentation skills. We had 2 great examples this morning from PhD students, and just last week, one of our MA students stood in front of a room as big as this and presented just brilliantly. This is what I think we are doing really well with our students. However, writing skills. As you may know, this year, at least in our faculty, the Dutch academic writing test is being introduced. And it is quite alarming how many students are failing this test. And this is an aspect where you say, okay, it should be happening at school, but still, we have the consequences. How do we tackle this? This is an area I think we really need seriously to address for the future. So, research and teaching, but there's something else that always comes up on your form when you're filling it in for what you're going to do the next year, and that's management. Do I have any favorite things in management? Yes, I do. Okay. One of my favorite things is putting people first. The term quality control often sends the shudders down into the boots of people who hear it, but this is not actually how it is meant. I had the pleasure of being director of our Linguistics Research Institute for some years, working together with 2 great coordinators. And quality control, in our terms, meant being strict, but actually making sure that the person was able to function in terms of research in an optimal way. And sometimes you have to help that person along when they've got into a period of getting stuck or whatever. Another one of my favorite things in this area is peer group coaching. Peer group coaching, or what is called in Dutch intervisie, is where there is a group of peers who have discussion and exchange around a particular problem in a very non-judgmental atmosphere. It's an extremely useful instrument at all levels, and I think people who have done it realize how good it is, and people who have not done it have no idea. All I can say is try it out. I have also had the privilege of working with two great coaches, and I have learned so much from them. I have been able to learn so much that I run groups myself, and it is something that I hope I'll be able to continue. Putting people first also it means you have to consider the conditions under which people are working. And something I think that needs to be addressed is the position of part-time staff. They have so many activities to do, and it is just as if they are doing the job of a full-time member of staff, but for less pay. And I feel really quite strongly about this. This is something we have to look at carefully. Another thing that I feel quite strongly about is staff who have to retire. Those of you in your youth will not be aware of the fact that when you retire at a university in the Netherlands, you are treated quite differently than colleagues in other European countries and the US and Australia. That is, you can't apply for grants anymore. You're 65, you're incapable, right? You can only supervise PhD students for 5 more years. And this is a source of great frustration to those who still feel active and willing to contribute. In other countries, there is no enforced retirement age, and specific positions are created for people who are senior citizens. I'd like you to think about the position of people like William Labov, our great sociolinguist, who's still publishing at the age of 78 and has recently just become editor of a new journal. Or someone like Anne Cutler, who was moved to a completely new lab with new people in Sydney. Why does the Netherlands insist on throwing away talent and enthusiasm? This is one of my favorite cartoons. I hope you can see it. The lady is looking at a campus map, and the arrow says, "You are here," but the other arrow says, "You are supposed to be here." Where are we then supposed to be? Well, in terms of research, of course, we've never finished. I mean, this is almost by definition. But some points deserve extra attention. The fact that the university should be involved in effectivity studies with practical institutions. We need to combine the expertise from both to be able to give a solid basis to educational policy and not have people declaiming as if it was their own religious belief. It's the policy these days to cut back on provision for children with language difficulties in the Netherlands. And who are the victims? The children. It's important to be able to publish non-significant results. Journals don't like doing this, but non-significant results are equally important as the significant ones, because you have shown that something does not have an effect. Recognition of sign language in the Netherlands. We have to keep battling on. It has to be a concerted effort to place the issue continually on the political agenda. And, as has become obvious, better people management. Okay, so why my favorite things? Why did I hit on that topic? Well, there's an obvious reason. These are my favorite things, things I feel strongly about. But there's also something else. That is Julie Andrews, who sang the song, and I promise you I'm not going to sing. She appeared in the film in 1965, The Sound of Music, and sang this song. And at that time, I was just 17. Well, compare these two photographs. At that age, I was constantly called Julie as a form of teasing because of the great resemblance between me and Julie Andrews. And like the actress, I suffered from the imposed image of Maria the nun, but anyone who knows me knows that couldn't be further from the truth. Nevertheless, I feel I share, and Julie Andrews suffered from it too, I share her persistence. She's now 77 and she's still performing. Okay, so rock on. Saying thank you. Again, those who know me know how very English I am and have remained. Despite all your efforts, my Dutch friends, I've remained English. And knowing that it's very important to say thank you and that it's not just a formality. My poor PhD students who got trained on the plane on the way to a conference in how to say please and thank you. Saying thank you then to my national and international colleagues. So many people, and I have just learned so much from you all. Another important category from everywhere that I have worked have been the secretarial and support staff. We can't do the job as academics without you, and particularly those of you who've worked with me, it's not easy to work with a perfectionist. I know. It takes your patience. All my students at every level, just great to see you grow and to learn from you too, the good questions that you ask. And all my Amsterdam colleagues, in particular from linguistics, see our famous Cut Blood, the magazine from linguistics, which has sort of represented what we do and the kind of interaction that we have. And of course, a big thank you to all of those of you who contributed to organizing this day. It was a great symposium this morning, and I'm very, very grateful for all the effort you have put in to making this a special day. I also want to thank my friends. It's not easy being friends with someone who has such a full diary. You have to persist and persevere, because you may say, yeah, we'll go out for dinner, but in 6 weeks' time. You have persevered, and thanks very much for doing that. I'm, of course, very grateful, too, to my parents, who always believed in me, sometimes too much, maybe, but they always did, and my family. You've been fantastic, and you've given me so much support. I said I wouldn't cry. You have really been tremendous, and it has just been so much fun, not just with you, but also with the grandchildren. This is supposed to be the end, but I just have one more thing to say. Where are we supposed to be? The points that I brought up. I'm not stopping. This is formally my farewell lecture, but don't you believe it, I'm not gone. And I want these things to continue, and I'm going to make sure that the time that I have will be invested to make sure that these things get done and need, because they need to be done. But it has to be a concerted effort. Thank you.
Ja, dit was Ernst afscheidscollege. Dat is een interessant woord, afscheidscollege. En ging op 7 augustus met pensioen. En ik heb er tot nu toe nog niks van gemerkt. Ze is even vaak op het bunghuis, nog steeds even druk. En ze heeft zelf ook al van alles erover gezegd. Ze zal ook druk blijven. Dus ik zou willen zeggen, dit was niet haar afscheidscollege, dit was haar doorstartcollege. Je hebt samengewerkt met heel veel collega's in de capaciteitsgroep taalwetenschap. Daarvoor het departement taalwetenschap. En ik geef nu graag het woord aan Paul Boersma, voorzitter van de capaciteitsgroep taalwetenschap, die Anne zal toespreken.
Dankjewel, Kees. Ja, ik ben dus Paul Boersma en ik mag iets zeggen namens de afdeling taalwetenschap, om het zo maar eens te noemen. En ik wilde inderdaad ook iets over de geschiedenis gaan vertellen eigenlijk. En ik kwam een aantal van dezelfde dingen tegen. Ik zal beginnen bij wat wij zien als het begin van je academische loopbaan. Dus iets later dan wanneer je zelf begon te praten net. Dus in 1977 bij de publicatie van je proefschrift in Duitsland. Dat ging over het vergelijken van eerste en tweede taalverwerving. En je deed experimenten en je concludeerde daar toen uit, dat heb je net niet gezegd meer, dat eerste taalverwervers en tweede taalverwervers, dus eerste taalverwervers van het Duits en tweede taalverwervers, dat zijn Engelse mensen die Duits leren, dat die helemaal niet zo verschillend waren als vaak werd geclaimd. Ik weet niet of dat op dit moment ook nog steeds je mening is. Gaat wel. Oké, leuk onderwerp. Maar N zat dus in Duitsland en in Duitsland is het niet genoeg om je proefschrift te publiceren. Dat is één ding wat je moet doen. Je moet, als je daar ooit hoogleraar wil worden, ook nog een zogeheten habil maken. Dat is een habilitation. Dat is nog een proefschrift, een soort proefschrift. En dat heeft ze dus ook nog gemaakt in 1986. En daarmee had ze haar onderwerp iets nauwer gemaakt. Het ging over het verwerven van geslacht, dus mannelijk, vrouwelijk, onzijdig, bij Duitse en een paar Engelse kinderen van 3 tot 10 jaar. Ja, net als bij veel literatuur uit het verleden zijn het niet zozeer de algemene conclusies die daaruit springen, maar vooral ook de anekdotes die erbij bleven. En ik heb dus een anekdote gevonden in een 200 bladzijden boek en het is helaas identiek aan die ze net heeft gepresenteerd, maar ik zal hem nog een keer doen. Er is een kind van 6 jaar en 8 maanden en die zegt das kraan, en dat gaat dus over een hijskraan, het hijskraan. En de moeder verbetert dat, zegt nee, het is der kraan. En dan zegt het kind, nee, dat kan niet, het moet zijn das kraan, want ja, een hijskraan is toch geen jongetje, eigenlijk. Zo, dan heb ik het dus voor de tweede keer verteld en nu moet hij dus heel duidelijk viraal gaan, dat kan nou niet meer uitblijven, deze anekdote. Zijn anekdote is gewoon heel illustratief. Hè. Ze kan vaak meer zeggen dan 1000 woorden over de ontwikkeling van de associatie tussen grammaticale en geslacht en natuurlijk geslacht het zou kunnen doen. Ik moet toch even nog, er staan meer anekdotes in het boek, gelukkig. Er was één kindje dat vond, net zoals wat ik vroeger gek vond, dat een muis in het Duits vrouwelijk is. Je moet zeggen die Maus. En dat vond ik altijd zo raar. En gelukkig blijkt dat ook Duitse kinderen dat raar vinden en dat een mannetjesmuis toch echt wel der Maus moet heten. Dus dat vond ik wel erg prettig. Blijkbaar zijn dus eerste taalverwervers toch hetzelfde als tweede taalverwervers. Ja. En ik heb me afgevraagd, omdat, en op een gegeven moment, in 1988 werd ze dan hoogleraar pathologie en psycholinguïstiek. En later pas hoogleraar gebarentaalwetenschap. En ik vroeg me af hoe dat zo gekomen was. Dus ik heb een reconstructie gepleegd, of pogen te plegen, die voor mij in ieder geval de gebeurtenis logisch aan elkaar koppelt. Dus net na je promotie, zo reconstrueer ik, raakte je geïnteresseerd in visie, dus het zien, het visueel systeem. In 1980 beschreef je een experiment over het McGurk-effect. Dat was een effect wat net een paar jaar daarvoor gevonden was, waarin de visuele informatie van spraak, dus het bewegen van de lippen, de overhand kan krijgen over auditieve informatie, dus het geluid. En 30 jaar later moest ik als foneticus een artikel over het McGurk-effect schrijven. Het ging over andere talen dan het Duits. En toen kon ik dus mijn resultaten vergelijken met die van Anne, die actueel gebleven waren. Dus dat was prettig. En ik denk dat het daar begonnen is, dat was namelijk 1980. Als een logisch vervolg, denk ik dan, want je schreef ook ergens aan het eind van, we zouden eens willen kijken hoe blinde kinderen dit doen. En een paar jaar later was ze dus ook met blinde kinderen bezig. Van ja, als je de visuele modaliteit mist, kan je dan net zo makkelijk het taalsysteem leren als andere kinderen of niet. Nou, je hebt ontdekt invloed van blindheid op inderdaad het uitspreken van lipklanken, op woordenschat, op de pragmatiek, op leerstrategieën, maar geen hele grote, laten we zeggen, problemen ontdekt. Nou, je wou toch misschien meer naar de problemen kijken. Dat ligt anders als een andere modaliteit ontbreekt, namelijk het gehoor. Dus een logische volgende stap lijkt mij dat je bezig ging houden met dove kinderen. En ik kan dat terugzien in de publicaties, althans tot 1990. Maar je begon ook meteen niet te pathologiseren, maar gewoon het gewone taalgebruik van doven te beschrijven, dus gebarentaal. En dat werd je nieuwe passie. Althans, zo heb ik het gelezen. Wat me ook opviel in je geschiedenis is een breuk, een best duidelijke breuk in de manier waarop je onderzoek gedaan hebt. Dus tot 1988 zien we uitsluitend werk geschreven door Anne Mills, je toenmalige naam, in je eentje geschreven. En vanaf 1988, toen je hier hoogleraar werd, zien we dat je bijna uitsluitend nog onderzoek samen met anderen hebt verricht. En ja, co-auteur, vaak eerste auteur, maar in ieder geval altijd meer dan één persoon als hoogleraar. En vanaf dat moment ben je de wetenschap vooruit gaan helpen, niet alleen door zelf onderzoek te doen, maar ook nieuwe wetenschappers te creëren en op te leiden. Als ik het goed heb geteld, heb je inmiddels 32 promoties begeleid. Van de eerste Barbara Ornelas in 1985 tot en met Esther Parriger in 2012. En je hebt ook nog op dit moment nog 8 promovendi. En als ik dat bij elkaar optel, kom ik op een nagewoeks van precies 40 wetenschappers. En waarvan hier heel veel, steek de hand eens op, wie er allemaal van aanwezig is. Van die 40 van die promovendi, nou, 21. Dat is toch hartstikke mooi. En je bent nog verder gegaan dan jezelf te vergroten tot 40. Je was bijna sinds de oprichting van het onderzoeksinstituut ACLC directeur geweest, 7 jaar lang. Dat is meer dan de helft van de tijd dat het bestaat. En ja, in mijn perceptie heb je weten te bewerkstelligen dat veel leden zich hebben omgevormd van mensen die slechts in lokale blaadjes schreven tot wereldwijde onderzoekers die publiceren in A-tijdschriften. Dan zal deze generalisatie misschien niet voor iedereen gelden, maar het is mij wel duidelijk dat de 300 leden die het ACLC in die 7 jaar gehad heeft, gemiddeld internationaal een stuk zichtbaarder zijn geworden. En dat is voor een heel groot deel aan jou te danken. En al die 300 mensen natuurlijk ook. Ook vindt iedereen nu heel normaal, je hebt het net al genoemd, dat ook promovendi en postdocs jaarlijke voortgangsgesprekken, ex-functioneringsgesprekken krijgen. Dat hadden we voorheen nauwelijks. En ik denk dat jij dat hebt ingevoerd bij ons in taalwetenschap. En ja, ik moet je hartelijk bedanken. Dus echt bedanken voor deze goede zorg die je hebt gehad voor al deze mensen binnen het ACLC. En ook de goede zorg, ik spreek ook namens de opleiding taalwetenschap, de goede zorg die de laatste 4 jaar voor de opleiding hebt gedaan door het hele onderwijs in goede banen te regelen. Nou, dan zijn we nu toe aan de laatste zinnen. Die zullen niet zo heel dramatisch zijn, omdat het niet echt een afscheid is, zoals je al hebt aangegeven. Je blijft gewoon je 8 promovendi begeleiden. Je gaat nieuw onderzoek weer ethisch beoordelen, daar blijf je ook mee bezig. En je organiseert natuurlijk een reusachtig congres volgend jaar juli. Dus ik zou zeggen, bedankt en vier het feest.
Het ging om een deeltijdbenoeming van 0,7 FTE. Want de instelling van de leerstoel was, zo heb ik me laten vertellen, de uitkomst van een leep politiek spel. Nu bleef er naast de leerstoel ook nog 0,3 FTE voor een UAD-schap over. En ze heeft het net eigenlijk uitgebreid verteld, en in die zin is mijn toespraak een samenvatting van alles wat er vandaag is gezegd. En had, voordat ze naar de UvA kwam, haar wetenschappelijke sporen verdiend in Engeland en Duitsland. Ze had er Frans, Duits en Engels gedoseerd op verschillende instellingen en vervolgens in Tübingen de graad van habilitation verworven op een studie The Acquisition of Gender in English and German. Het waren die wetenschappelijke activiteiten die haar al voor 1988 in contact brachten met Nederlandse onderzoekers, in het bijzonder Leefveld aan het Max Planck Instituut in Nijmegen. En zo kwam Anne in 1988 terecht aan de Universiteit van Amsterdam. 10 jaar later zou deze benoeming worden omgezet in 2 leerstoelen, namelijk een structurele leerstoel in de linguïstiek en een persoonlijke leerstoel op het gebied van de Nederlandse gebarentaal. Een omzetting die overigens tot ambtelijke verwarring leidde, want de benoeming had al plaatsgevonden voordat die tweede leerstoel formeel door het college van bestuur was ingesteld. Het college vond die instelling daarom niet nodig, maar Anne die stond erop dat dit alsnog zou gebeuren, omdat ze graag een oratie op het terrein van de nieuwe leerstoel wilde houden. En zo geschiedde in mei 1998. Deze wijziging en uitbreiding van haar takenpakket paste perfect in de dynamische ontwikkeling van Anne's carrière. De lijst van taken en functies, we hebben het gezien, de lijst van taken en functies die zij in de loop van de jaren vervulde, is ronduit indrukwekkend. Binnen de faculteit, maar ook daarbuiten, in de vorm van nationale en internationale tijdschriftredacties en lidmaatschappen van commissies en organisaties, vooral op het gebied van gebarentaal en van auditief en communicatief gestoorde kinderen. En dan heb ik het toch niet over haar omvangrijke onderzoeksprojecten. Van al die functies die zij vervulde wilde ik er 1 uitlichten. En leidde van 1 september 2002 tot september 2008 het ACLC. En dat deed zij als teamworker bij uitstek met verve. De uitstekende beoordeling van het ACLC bij de onderzoeksvisitatie van 2007 was mede op haar persoonlijk konto te schrijven. En daarmee heeft zij een onschatbare bijdrage geleverd aan de zeer hoge positie van de Amsterdamse taalwetenschap op de internationale rankings. Het ACLC is een van de paradepaadjes van onze faculteit, zelfs van onze universiteit. En heeft zich al die jaren onvermoeibaar ingezet voor het onderwijs en het onderzoek aan onze faculteit. En dat was niet altijd even eenvoudig. Uit haar jaarlijkse verslagen spreekt soms ook teleurstelling over hoe moeizaam sommige zaken aan de faculteit en binnen de afdeling plegen te verlopen. Over het gebrek aan interne communicatie en de beperkte middelen om actief wat te doen aan bijvoorbeeld werkdruk en personeelsbeleid. Vooral dat laatste heeft haar tot de dag van vandaag bezig gehouden. En de zorg voor je collega's, vooral jongere vrouwelijke collega's, die bij jou vaak een luisterend oor vonden en voor wie jij als vertrouwenspersoon ook opkwam als je dat nodig achtte. Ook dat is iets wat wij gaan missen. Beste Anne, je zei het al, juist deze week werd bekend dat het college van bestuur een nieuwe persoonlijke hoogleraar op het gebied van de Nederlandse gebarentaal heeft benoemd. En in dat opzicht ben je misschien inderdaad vervangbaar. Gelukkig maar, zou ik zeggen. Maar als persoon ben je dat veel moeilijker. Juist door wie je was, hoe je je taak hebt opgevat en wat je voor je collega's, daarmee de faculteit en de universiteit hebt betekend. We zullen je missen, ook al ga je niet weg. Beste Anne, ik zie het als een voorrecht dat ik je heb mogen toespreken, dat ik je als collega heb leren kennen. Namens de faculteit, namens de universiteit wil ik je ontzettend hartelijk bedanken voor alles wat je de afgelopen 25 jaar voor ons, studenten en collega's hebt gedaan. Je gaat niet weg, maar dit is wel het moment om het te zeggen. Het gaat je goed. Dank u wel.
We komen nu aan het eind van het formele gedeelte van deze bijeenkomst. En we gaan nu over naar het informele gedeelte. We begeven ons naar de receptieruimte. Dat gaat op de volgende manier. Eerst vertrekt Anne met haar familie en het gezin door de middengang. Zij wordt gevolgd door het cortège en daarna mag iedereen aansluiten. Ik hoop dat iedereen er nog kan blijven.